Welcome back to part two of the American Modernism introduction. This time we're just going to focus on one slide and one slide only because I have additional information from my lovely, lovely wife who has a master's in history, and she wanted to offer you guys a better understanding of World War One, which is, I think, absolutely necessary for understanding why Gatsby thinks the way he does, and why, of course, the author F. Scott Fitzgerald and everyone else who's involved in the 1920s, 30s, and even 40s American modernism movement thought the way they thought. So with World War One, the basics here are 32 countries were involved and claimed the lives of over 20 million people. There were new weapons because of the rise and introductions of new types of technology. And it signaled an end to idealism and ushered in an era marked by hedonism, which is just doing everything for pleasure, political corruption, and ruthless business practices. People no longer cared about those around them. They only cared about the bottom line because they just wanted to live their own lives. And then, of course, the jazz age of the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, began as well. It was the greatest, gaudiest spree in history. Young people were rebelling against past and tradition because it led, what did their past lead to? World War One. And they also began to experiment with fashion. So some information I'm going to add here is going to begin with Germany and France. So Germany and France lost 80% of their male population aged 15 to 49. So imagine everyone around you dying. Couldn't your way of thinking after that happened lead to a living in the moment way of experiencing life, where you just want to drink and you want to have fun and not really care about your future all that much? Because what did you experience at the war? Men ages 15 to 19 or 15 to 49 just dying all around you. So Germany and France lost all of them. Well, also consider the fact, because of the male population taking such a nosedive in World War One, how women had to move to the forefront. Women are often seen as getting more rights in World War II, but it actually began much earlier than that because there weren't any men to work the jobs. And even when the war ended, men didn't come home to fill those roles again. Women had to keep on doing them. World War I was also called the Great War because it affected people in every continent and was supposed to be the war to end all wars. All the countries got involved. Every continent got involved. Because up to this moment, wars were only usually based in one continent with a handful of countries or people involved, one, two, or three. But this was supposed to be the one where all things were decided. Troops helped also spread the 1918 influenza pandemic. I know we're experiencing a pandemic right now, but one existed in the 1910s in the form of the flu. And people often think the flu isn't all that big of a deal. Well, it killed a lot of people. 675,000 people died. So imagine coming home from a war. You survived horrific experiences in World War I, and then you now are watching your friends and loved ones die, sometimes in a matter of hours, to the flu. You get the flu and you die because it just takes you out. So even the government, which was the one that was supposed to be there to protect you, lied about the flu's dangers, or the fact that even this many people were getting sick and dying. You wouldn't trust anybody. You wouldn't, look long term. You just want to live in the moment, and that's kind of seen again in Gatsby. Countries imposed restrictions on trade, capital flow, which is money, the flow of money, and immigration. People became suspicious of foreigners. I mean, people already disliked immigrants. That's not something new. When there are new people to an area, people always distrust them. But this additional concern and uneasiness as the result of World War I led to new laws and restrictions that prevented foreigners from getting anywhere close to the American dream. So even though you're coming to a different country to make a new life for yourself, now there are actual laws in place that prevent you from even getting anywhere close to that because you just can't be trusted. So that kind of expanded quickly after World War I. As I mentioned earlier, women were working. They were working during the war, but they were also working after the war, and this led to advocating and receiving the right to vote. And with money, because now they have jobs, and the ability to vote, women were willing to confront those stereotypes and cultural norms of a male-dominated society. They had a voice, and they had messages that they wanted everyone to know. This is seen in not only politics, but also fashion as well. After the war, blacks moved north in what's called the Great Migration to avoid Jim Crow laws, where there was additional discrimination against those who were black. Racism was still a problem in the North. That's a given. But black citizens could live a better life and remain independent because workers were needed. There were factories that needed to function. There were areas that had the ability for people to move in. This included Brooklyn and Harlem. And because all of these new black Americans were moving up north, the Jazz Age began because they were willing to express themselves and they had the ability to do so and the means to do so, and they weren't experiencing the heavy discrimination of Jim Crow laws in the South. And the last bit here is more than 100,000 tons of poisonous gas were used in World War I, and it killed 90,000 people. When you take a look at how many people actually died, you might think, well, 90,000 isn't that many. But it's not the fact that they lived or died. It's the fact that those around soldiers who succumbed to those gases still came home with those horrors seeing that happen. There's bullets, there's explosions, but now there's this gas, which has now, of course, been outlawed from all war. If any country tries to use any kind of gas whatsoever, all the countries go after it because it's so horrific to even think about. I do have an image here that kind of describes the gases that were used. You have tear gas, which we still use today. It's not something that kills people, but it does cause problems breathing and whatnot until you move out of the area, or until you have about 30 minutes of not experiencing it. The three that really killed people were chlorine, which we find in pools but can turn into a gas leak, phosgene and diosgene, and then mustard gas. So each one of these, of course, affected lungs. Sometimes it's a colorless, oily liquid. You can pause this video, take a look, and actually read through these because all of these are horrible. But imagine being a soldier and seeing any of this happen on the battlefield, where it's not an explosion, it's not a bullet, it's people just not able to breathe, suffocating right in front of you, and you're wondering if you're next. Well, these soldiers came home, and no one really understood the horrors that they experienced. Well, how do you think that translates into living your life? So all of this kind of moved forward, moved America into the 1920s, which is where the Gatsby takes place, but we're going to go and continue this video in just a minute. Thank you.